Today we're going to be talking about the connection between our thoughts and our emotions. Now you'll remember in previous sections we've talked about triggers. We've talked about how sometimes something in the present moment can then trigger a reaction of thoughts and feelings that then start bringing up things from the past and build into the thought-emotion tornado, if you'll remember that. Well, what we're going to be doing today is taking that tornado and we're going to learn how to slow it down so that we can take action in the present moment when we have a trigger and when our thoughts and emotions are ping-ponging back and forth out of control. So let me explain how we do that. If you'll look in your books at pages 132 and 133, you'll see that you have a chart that looks very similar to the one on the screen. And it has events, emotions and temperature, where you felt something in your body, the thoughts, the meaning, and then a challenge. So I'm going to just take you through this chart based on an experience that I had. Now, what we're going to be looking for when we talk about an event is we're looking for something when everything seems to be going just as normal, and then all of a sudden there's this small shift, and you're looking for the very first shift that happens in your emotions that tell you that something's off. Not when it gets big and out of control, but we're looking at that first shift as an indicator or a temperature of what's going awry. Now, as you saw in the book, I talked about how when we're sick in our bodies, the temperature is something that tells us that something is wrong. It's not the culprit itself, it just tells us that there's something we need to look at underneath. In the same way, when we get triggered, it's that very first emotion that's like the temperature that says, hey, something's off here, let's look more deeply. So my event was at a party. I had a very good friend that I'd had for about 2 years, and she was going through a time where she was struggling with some things with her child. And at this party, she was telling everybody about how awful things were and that she was very anxious. Now, the problem was, I was going through a lot more that I hadn't actually told her about at the time, and so at the party I did not acknowledge my friend's anxiety, and I actually dismissed her. So you can understand that she probably didn't take that very well. Now, in my own self, looking at the emotions and temperature of what was going on, what caused me just to dismiss my friend and hurt her feelings, especially someone that I truly cared about, I had to look at, number one, there was anxiety, because at the time I didn't realize what was going on, but her anxiety was triggering anxiety inside of myself. As she was talking about what made her anxious, unknowingly my body was building up all of this anxiety. And I felt it, if you look at in the body, I felt it in my throat and in my stomach. The second emotion I felt was shame, because at that point in time, when she was talking about what was going on, I started feeling shame about myself. So that's the emotion. And then the temperature, anxiety was a 7 out of 10. And when we look at the temperature, we're thinking again about like a temperature in our body on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not at all and 10 being this is the most I've ever felt it. So the anxiety was pretty high, and as you'll see on this chart, the shame was actually pretty high and an 8. Now, where did I feel it in my body? I mentioned that just a minute ago with anxiety. Anxiety is often here in the throat and the chest, and I definitely felt that anxiety rising up in my throat. And then when I felt the shame, I felt it in my cheeks. And often we do feel shame in your cheeks. So at this point, I was feeling it in my chest, my throat, and my cheeks. And at that point, I ended up just dismissing her. Now, the thoughts that were going on in my head at this time were, number one, how could you be complaining about something so small? Because in my mind, that was something small, and so my thought at that point was really judgmental of her. The second one was, I've had much worse. How many times have you thought that? And then the third one was, and this is the big one, if you only knew what we were going through at this very moment, what would you think of me? I bet you would reject me. That's what was at the real core of what I was thinking. And so in these thoughts, we need to just take them a step further and go, what does this mean? And if we're looking at thoughts, the way to tell the meaning is to go, well, if this is true, then what? So, for example, if I'm thinking, what if you only knew, what would you think of me? And I go, well, if she thought I was a loser or thought I don't want to be your friend, what would that mean? It means I'd be rejected. It means I'd feel ashamed. So if you look at the first meaning, it's really shame. The core of what got to me in this moment was my own shame. I felt ashamed about what we were going through, and just to give you a real quick snippet of the situation, at this time my daughter had just finished with a cancer, and we were in a period back after the collapse, the economic collapse in 2008. It was right around, I think, 2010 or maybe 11, that we had gotten to a place where my husband was out of a job, and we had 2 homes that we were trying to pay for. We didn't have enough money, and we were getting very close to potentially going bankrupt. So this is something that I hid from everyone, because we were living in a really nice suburb in a nice home and sending one of my kids to private school, and I was scared to death of what people would think about me, that they would all reject me and want nothing to do with me. So I didn't share that at the time. That's what was going on in me, and so really it was about my own shame that I was then projecting onto her. Secondly, when I asked, what's this really about? As I said, secondly, it was my own fear of rejection. I expected that if she knew what I was going through, that she would reject me and that she would abandon me, because there had been other people that when they found out what was going on, they didn't really want to talk to me anymore. And I was afraid she would do the same thing, and I didn't want to lose her friendship. So now, once we start to understand the meaning, like the rejection, the fear, the final thing we want to do is to begin to challenge these things and look at what is true, what can I see that would be a healthier voice. And as you're going to find in later weeks, we're going to take these things and develop this healthy voice as going to become our coach. But for right now, let's look at the challenge in this situation. So, number 1, what would it have looked like if I could let go of my own pain just to listen to her and to meet her right where she is? So I would say the challenge to the shame would be to say, can I put aside my own feelings, put them maybe in a box for the moment and deal with them later, acknowledge that flag, acknowledge the temperature, and say, okay, that's something I need to deal with, but what can I do right now in this moment to be a good friend to her? So that would be the first thing. And of course I would have had to see that and figure that out at the very first step. Now sometimes we aren't able to do that. So if I hadn't done that, what's the next thing I could have done? Well, the second one is I could have said, you know what, if she's a true friend, then I should be able to tell her these things. I could have pulled her aside or said, hey, can we talk for a minute? And I could have told her, just in a brief snippet, like I told you what was going on and what I was afraid of, that I was afraid of rejection. Yes, I'd be opening myself up vulnerably, but at the same time, 1, if she's a true friend, she would meet me where I was, and she'd understand. And if she didn't understand, then I have to say, is that the kind of friend I really want? So those are ways that I could begin to challenge myself in this situation to act differently. And even afterward, I don't have this on the chart, but knowing what happened, I actually did go and apologize and tell her a little bit more what was going on. And so that would be the third possibility, is what I ended up doing after the situation. So at this point, I also I want us as a group to look at your event, emotion, where you felt in your body and your thoughts. And then once you've done that, as a group, I want you to think about the meanings and the challenges. And then one other thing I want to ask y'all to do is to identify any cognitive distortions. And so think about right now in my own example, what cognitive distortions do you see? So go ahead and discuss that real quick. I'll tell you what I see in here is, number 1, I see a whole lot of mind reading. because I'm making a lot of assumptions that if I tell her she's going to reject me, she'll feel this way, and that's totally not true. So there's a whole lot of mind reading going on. And then I would say, secondly, you may have guessed, blaming and self-blame. So I was doing a lot of self-blame of myself as well. So once we're able to identify these things, then what we can do is we can begin to challenge them. So that's what I want you guys to do in this next exercise together. And then after we finish this exercise, in a week or so, we're going to take all of what we've learned here and we're going to begin looking even deeper at how do we develop our healthy selves or our coach. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.